The HOA board president was standing on my front porch at 7 in the morning, pointing her perfectly manicured finger at me like I had just committed a federal crime. And all I could think about was how this woman had no idea who she was actually threatening. "Mr. Erikson, this is your final warning," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "If your company doesn't plow Meadowbrook Drive within the next 2 hours, we will be issuing a $5,000 fine per day until the work is completed." I stood there in my doorway, coffee mug in hand, wearing my worn University of Michigan sweatshirt, and just stared at her. The January wind was brutal in Boulder, Colorado, whipping snow around her blonde bob that probably cost more than most people's car payments. Her name was Patricia Henderson, and she had been the HOA president of Evergreen Hills for exactly 3 months. 3 months of pure, unfiltered chaos for everyone who lived in this neighborhood. "I'm sorry, what?" I said, genuinely confused. "My company." Patricia's eyes narrowed. She was probably in her late 40s, dressed in a cream-colored parka that looked like it had never actually seen real winter weather, and holding a leather-bound notebook that I assumed contained every perceived slight and rule violation in the neighborhood since 1987. "Don't play dumb with me, Gregory. You own Arctic Storm Snow Removal, don't you?" She said my company name like it was something distasteful she had to scrape off her shoe. "Here's the thing. I did own Arctic Storm Snow Removal. I had started it 12 years ago, right after I got out of the Army, and over the past decade, it had grown from just me and a used pickup truck to a fleet of 23 vehicles and 42 employees. We handled commercial contracts all over Boulder County, including several government buildings, shopping centers, and about 80% of the residential neighborhoods in the area, including Evergreen Hills. But Patricia Henderson clearly didn't know that the company she was threatening to fine was the same company that had held the snow removal contract for Evergreen Hills for the past 8 years. A contract that I hadn't personally handled in at least 5 years because I had managers who dealt with that stuff now. "I do own Arctic Storm," I said carefully, "but I'm confused about what you're talking about. What's wrong with Meadowbrook Drive? What's wrong?" Her voice went up about 3 octaves. "What's wrong is that it hasn't been plowed in 2 days, and Mrs. Chen couldn't get her car out of her driveway yesterday to make it to her doctor's appointment. The entire street is a disaster, and we pay your company good money to keep our roads clear." I took a sip of my coffee, my mind already running through the logistics. We'd had that massive storm 2 days ago, 14 inches of snow in 18 hours, which had stretched our crews thin. But we had protocols. Every contract had priority levels and response times built in. Evergreen Hills was a Tier 1 contract, which meant roads should be cleared within 12 hours of snowfall ending. "Let me make some calls," I said. "I'm sure there's just been some miscommunication." "Miscommunication?" Patricia's face was turning red now. "Mr. Erikson, I have called your company 17 times in the past 2 days. 17 times. And every single time I get some secretary telling me that my concerns have been noted and someone will get back to me. Well, I'm done waiting. The board met last night, and we voted unanimously to issue these fines. You have 2 hours. She shoved a piece of paper at me, official HOA letterhead with a bunch of legal language that I couldn't read properly without my reading glasses. Then she turned on her designer boots and marched back down my sidewalk, which, ironically, I had personally shoveled and salted at 5 that morning before my workout. I closed the door and pulled out my phone. It was Saturday, which meant my office manager Linda wasn't in, but my operations manager, Tom Martinez, should be up. He lived for this job, probably slept with his phone under his pillow. He answered on the second ring. Boss, hey, what's up? Tom, what's going on with Evergreen Hills? Specifically Meadowbrook Drive. There was a pause. I heard papers shuffling. Meadowbrook Drive. That's the small street in the northwest section, right? Only about 6 houses. That's the one. The HOA president just showed up at my door threatening to fine us $5,000 a day because it hasn't been plowed. What? No way. Let me check the logs. More shuffling, keyboard clicking. Okay, so we cleared the main arteries Thursday night after the snow stopped. Pinecrest Avenue, Aspen Way, Evergreen Boulevard, all done by 6 a.m. Friday. Then we did secondary streets Friday morning, which would include Meadowbrook. According to the GPS logs, truck 17 was on Meadowbrook at 9:43 a.m. Friday. So we did plow it. Yeah, absolutely. Wait, hold on. His voice got tense. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. What? I'm looking at the photos. We require all drivers to take before and after shots, right? For exactly this kind of situation. Marcus was driving truck 17. His photos show Meadowbrook completely clear, both Friday morning and this morning. He swung by at 6 a.m. today as part of his route to check all our residential contracts. I walked to my kitchen and set my coffee down. So, why is the HOA president telling me the street is a disaster? Boss, I think you better look at this. I'm sending you the photos now. My phone buzzed. I opened the images Tom sent. The first set showed Meadowbrook Drive on Friday morning at 9:43, exactly like Tom said. The street was buried under more than a foot of snow. The aftershots, taken at 10:15, showed the same street completely clear, neat snowbanks on either side, perfect visibility. The next set was from this morning, 6:07 a.m. The street was completely clear in those photos too. Clean pavement, pushed back snowbanks, textbook work. Tom, these photos show the street is fine. Exactly. So either the HOA president is lying or something happened between 6:07 this morning and when she came to your house. I looked at my watch. It was 7:20 now. That's barely an hour window. Yeah. You want me to send Marcus back over there right now? Have him document whatever she's seeing. Do that. And Tom, send me copies of our contract with the Evergreen Hills HOA. All the terms, response times, everything. You got it. I'll have Marcus report back in 30 minutes. I hung up and realized my peaceful Saturday morning had just evaporated. I had been planning to work on my truck, the old 1985 Ford F-250 I was restoring in my garage, and maybe catch the Avalanche game later. Instead, I was dealing with HOA drama. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Marcus Santiago, one of my best drivers and a former Navy mechanic who took pride in his work. Mr. Erikson, hey sir, Tom said to call you directly. What did you find, Marcus? So I just drove down Meadowbrook Drive again. The street is completely clear. I mean, it looks exactly like it did when I left at 6 this morning. I don't know what that HOA lady is talking about. I took more photos. I'm sending them to Tom now. Did you see anyone on the street? Talk to any residents? Yeah, actually. There was an older Asian lady getting into her car. I asked her if she'd had any problems, and she said the street's been fine. She was really nice, actually. Said she appreciated how quickly we always get the roads clear. That would be Mrs. Chen, the woman Patricia claimed couldn't get out of her driveway yesterday. Something wasn't adding up. Thanks, Marcus. If anyone from the HOA contacts you, be polite, but don't give them any information. Just tell them to contact our office. Yes, sir. I spent the next hour going through the contract Tom had sent me. It was pretty standard stuff, actually more favorable to us than a lot of agreements we had. We were contracted to maintain all streets within Evergreen Hills neighborhood to a safe and passable standard within 12 hours of snow accumulation ending. We got paid a flat monthly rate during winter months, plus additional fees for storms over 12 inches. The contract also had a dispute resolution clause that required any complaints to go through a formal written process before any fines could be issued. The HOA had to provide photographic evidence of any alleged breach, allow us 72 hours to remedy the situation, and if we disputed the claim, it went to binding arbitration. Patricia Henderson's little paper she'd shoved at me this morning didn't follow any of those procedures. It was just a typed-up threat with no actual legal backing. My doorbell rang at exactly 9 a.m. I figured it was Patricia again, probably ready to threaten me with more fines or maybe get the whole neighborhood to form an angry mob. Instead, it was my next-door neighbor, Robert Chang, holding a travel mug of what smelled like phenomenal coffee. "Hey Greg, you got a minute?" Robert was a patent attorney, early 60s, and one of the sanest people in the neighborhood. We'd had dinner at each other's houses dozens of times over the years. Always. "Come on in." Robert stepped inside and handed me the travel mug. "That's the good stuff from that roaster in downtown Denver. Figured you might need it after Patricia's visit this morning. You saw that." I was getting my newspaper. Saw her marching up your walkway with that look she gets. The one where she thinks she's about to rain holy justice down on some poor soul. He settled into one of my kitchen chairs. "She's going after you about the snow removal. Apparently Meadowbrook Drive is a disaster zone and hasn't been plowed in 2 days. Except I've got photos showing it's been perfectly clear and my driver just confirmed it again 20 minutes ago." Robert's eyebrows went up. "That's interesting. Very interesting." "Why?" "Because Patricia held an emergency board meeting 2 nights ago. Thursday night during the storm. I'm on the board, but she didn't tell me about it. She only told Sandra Fleming and Richard Kowalski, the 2 members who basically do whatever she says." "That doesn't sound legal." "It's not. Our bylaws require all board members to be notified of any meetings at least 24 hours in advance, except in genuine emergencies. And even then, all members have to be informed. But Patricia's been playing fast and loose with the rules ever since she got elected president." I sipped the coffee. It was exceptional. "So what happened at this secret meeting?" According to Sandra, who told her husband, who told me, they voted to terminate the snow removal contract with Arctic Storm and hire a new company. A company that Patricia's brother-in-law apparently runs out of Fort Collins. And there it was. The real reason for Patricia's visit this morning. She wanted to fire my company and give the contract to a family member, but she needed grounds to do it. Claiming we weren't doing our job would be those grounds, even if it was completely fabricated. "Does Patricia know I own Arctic Storm?" I asked. Robert shook his head. "I don't think so. She's relatively new to the neighborhood, only bought her house here last summer. She moved from California, made a fortune in real estate, and decided to get involved in community leadership, which apparently means micromanaging everyone and running the HOA like her personal fiefdom. Well, this is going to be an interesting conversation. Greg, be careful with her. She's vindictive. The Johnsons 2 streets over planted a tree that was supposedly 3 inches too close to the sidewalk, according to some obscure covenant rule from 1995, and Patricia made their lives hell for 6 months. Fines, legal threats, the whole 9 yards. They ended up moving the tree just to get her off their backs, cost them $4,000. I nodded slowly. I'd heard stories about Patricia's reign of terror, but I'd mostly stayed out of HOA business. I owned my house outright, kept my property immaculate, and generally didn't cause problems. I figured that would be enough to stay off her radar. Apparently not. "Thanks for the heads up, Robert, and thanks for the coffee." "No problem. Oh, and one more thing. There's a general HOA meeting scheduled for next Friday night. Patricia's planning to bring up the snow removal issue and push for an emergency vote to terminate your company's contract. Thought you should know. After Robert left, I called my lawyer. Jessica Winters had handled all my business legal work since I started Arctic Storm, and she was sharp as they came. I explained the situation, sent her copies of the contract and Patricia's bogus fine letter, and asked her what my options were. "This is pretty blatant," Jessica said after reviewing everything. "She's not following any of the dispute procedures in your contract. If she tries to terminate without cause, you can sue the HOA for breach of contract. Given you've got photographic evidence that you're performing the work, and she has no evidence that you're not, you'd almost certainly win. What about the meeting next Friday? You should attend. As a homeowner in Evergreen Hills, you have the right to speak during the open comment period. You can present your evidence and show the other homeowners that Patricia is making false claims. That might be enough to turn the vote against her. And if it's not, then we file an injunction to prevent them from terminating the contract until an arbitrator can hear the case. But honestly, Greg, I think once the other homeowners see what's really going on, they won't support her. Most people don't like being lied to." I spent the rest of Saturday documenting everything. I had Tom compile a complete report of every service call we'd made to Evergreen Hills for the past 6 months, complete with GPS logs, time stamps, and photographs. Our records were immaculate because we'd learned years ago that good documentation was the difference between getting paid and ending up in court. Sunday morning, I decided to take a drive through the neighborhood. I wanted to see the situation with my own eyes. I drove down every street in Evergreen Hills, and they were all perfectly maintained. Snow banks were neat and uniform, streets were clear down to bare pavement, and I saw several residents out walking their dogs or getting into their cars with no problems. When I turned onto Meadowbrook Drive, I saw why Patricia had claimed it was a disaster. Someone had pushed massive piles of snow back into the street, creating hazardous mounds right in the middle of the road. It looked deliberate, like someone had taken a plow or a large snow blower and intentionally created obstacles. I parked and got out, taking photos from every angle. The snow piles were fresh, probably made within the past few hours based on how the snow looked. And here's what made it obvious this was deliberate sabotage. The piles were positioned in almost perfect intervals, like someone had measured out exactly where to place them for maximum disruption. One of the garage doors opened, and an elderly woman came out. Mrs. Chen, I assumed. She looked confused by the snow piles. "Excuse me," I called out. "I'm Greg Erikson from Arctic Storm Snow Removal. Have these piles been here long?" She walked over, bundled in a puffy coat. "Oh, you're with the snow company. You folks do such good work." "No, these weren't here when I went to church this morning at 8:30. I just got back and this is what I found. It's very strange." "Did you have any trouble getting out yesterday for a doctor's appointment?" Her face scrunched up in confusion. "Doctor's appointment?" "No, I didn't have any appointments yesterday. I was home all day baking cookies for my grandchildren. The street was perfectly clear." I thanked her and called Tom. "We've got a situation. Someone is deliberately sabotaging our work on Meadowbrook Drive. I need you to send a crew out here right now to clear it again, and I want someone stationed where they can see this street for the rest of the day." "You think the HOA president did this?" "I think someone did, and I want to catch them if they try it again." Tom sent Marcus and another driver, Jeff Chen, to clear the sabotaged snow piles. It took them about 20 minutes. Then Marcus parked his truck at the end of Pinecrest Avenue where he had a clear sight line to Meadowbrook Drive, and we waited. I grabbed lunch and came back to the neighborhood around 2 p.m. Marcus called me at 3:15. "Boss, you're not going to believe this. A silver Mercedes SUV just pulled up to Meadowbrook Drive. Driver got out with a snow shovel and started pushing snow from the banks back into the street." "Did you get photos?" "Better. I got video, clear shot of the license plate too. Perfect. Don't confront them, just document everything. Already done. They're leaving now. Should I follow?" "No, just send me everything you captured." The video Marcus sent was crystal clear. A silver Mercedes GLE 450 pulled up to Meadowbrook Drive at 3:07 p.m. The driver, a middle-aged man in expensive winter gear, got out and spent 15 minutes deliberately pushing snow from the neat banks our crews had created back into the middle of the street. He worked methodically, creating the same type of hazardous piles I'd seen that morning, then got back in his Mercedes and drove away. The license plate was clearly visible. I ran it through a database one of my security-minded friends had access to. The Mercedes was registered to Richard Kowalski, one of the board members who'd attended Patricia's secret meeting. Now I had them. The week leading up to Friday's HOA meeting was tense. I got another threatening letter from Patricia on Wednesday, this one demanding $15,000 in accumulated fines and threatening legal action. I ignored it and had Jessica send a formal response explaining that the HOA was in breach of the contract's dispute resolution procedures, and that any further harassment would result in a countersuit. Patricia apparently didn't like that, because she showed up at my house Wednesday evening with Sandra Fleming, the other board member from the secret meeting. Sandra was in her 50s, thin and nervous looking, like someone who'd spent her whole life agreeing with whoever spoke loudest. "Mr. Erikson, you are being completely unreasonable," Patricia announced before I'd even fully opened the door. "We have photographic evidence that your company is not fulfilling its obligations." "Great," I said. "I'd love to see that evidence. Could you send it to my lawyer?" Her contact information was in the letter you received. "We don't need to go through lawyers for this. This is a simple matter of you doing your job properly." "Then why are members of the HOA board deliberately sabotaging my crew's work?" Patricia's face went still. Sandra looked like she might faint. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Really?" "Because I have video evidence of Richard Kowalski pushing snow back into the middle of Meadowbrook Drive after my crews had cleared it. That's the street you claimed was a disaster, remember?" "That's ridiculous. Richard would never." "I've got it in high definition, Patricia. Time-stamped, clear view of his face and his license plate. He spent 15 minutes on Sunday afternoon deliberately creating the exact hazards you claimed were evidence of my company's poor performance." Sandra actually did look like she might pass out now. Patricia's jaw clenched so hard I thought she might crack a tooth. "You're lying," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Come to the meeting Friday night. I'll show everyone the video. We can all watch it together." They left without another word. I noticed Sandra talking frantically to Patricia as they walked to their cars, but Patricia just got in her BMW and drove off. Friday night arrived with another small snowstorm, just 3 inches, but enough that my crews were out in force making sure every contract property was pristine. I had Marcus personally handle Meadowbrook Drive and take enough photos to fill a small gallery. The HOA meeting was held at the Evergreen Hills Community Center, a nice building with a large meeting room that could hold about 100 people. When I arrived at 7 p.m., the parking lot was nearly full. Apparently, word had spread that something interesting was going to happen. I saw Robert inside, saving me a seat near the front. Patricia was at the head table with Sandra, Richard, and 2 other board members I recognized. David Torres and Michelle Wu. David and Michelle both looked uncomfortable, which made sense since Robert had told me they hadn't been informed about the secret meeting either. Patricia called the meeting to order and went through the standard opening procedures, reading the minutes from the last meeting, discussing some upcoming neighborhood events. Then she got to what she'd really wanted to talk about. Our next item is a matter of significant importance to everyone in this community. As you all know, we contract with Arctic storm snow removal to maintain our streets during winter months. Recently, there have been serious concerns about the quality of service we've been receiving. She clicked a remote and a photo appeared on the screen behind her. It showed Meadowbrook Drive covered in snow piles. This is Meadowbrook Drive, photographed last Saturday morning. As you can see, the street is completely impassable. This is unacceptable. Murmurs went through the crowd. Patricia continued, "We have attempted to work with Arctic Storm to remedy these issues, but they have been unresponsive and defensive. Therefore, the board is recommending that we terminate our contract with Arctic Storm and engage a new company that will actually provide the service we're paying for." "Point of order," Robert said, standing up. Patricia looked annoyed. "Yes, Robert. You said the board is recommending this action. Was there a vote?" "Yes, there was a board meeting last Thursday." "That's interesting because I'm on the board and I wasn't notified of any meeting last Thursday." The murmurs got louder. Patricia's face flushed. "It was an emergency meeting due to the storm. The bylaws require all board members to be notified of emergency meetings. I received no notification." "Did David or Michelle?" David Torres shook his head. "No, I didn't hear anything about a meeting." Michelle Wu added, "Neither did I." "So what you actually had," Robert continued, "was 3 board members having a private conversation and claiming it was an official vote. That's not legal under our governing documents." Patricia looked like she wanted to throw her gavel at Robert. Regardless of procedural technicalities, the issue remains that Arctic Storm is not performing adequate service. "Actually," I said, standing up, "I'd like to address that claim. May I speak during the open comment period?" "This isn't the open comment period yet." "Then I move that we table the discussion of the snow removal contract until the open comment period so that all relevant information can be presented before any vote is taken," Robert said smoothly. "I second that motion," David Torres added. Patricia had no choice but to allow it. She moved through the rest of the agenda items quickly, clearly irritated, until we finally reached open comments. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. "Good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Greg Erikson. I live on Pinecrest Avenue and have been a homeowner here for 8 years. I'm also the owner of Arctic Storm Snow Removal." That got everyone's attention. I saw Patricia's eyes widen slightly. She genuinely hadn't known. "Miss Henderson has claimed that my company is not adequately servicing this neighborhood. I'd like to present evidence to the contrary." I pulled out my laptop and connected it to the projector. This is a compilation of GPS logs, time-stamped photographs, and service records for every time we've serviced Evergreen Hills over the past 6 months. I walked through the presentation methodically, showed how we'd responded to every single snowfall within our contracted time frames, showed before and after photos of every street, including Meadowbrook Drive, demonstrating that our work was thorough and professional. Then I got to the important part. Miss Henderson showed you a photo of Meadowbrook Drive covered in snow piles. That photo was taken Saturday morning. What she didn't tell you is that my crew had completely cleared that street the previous day. I showed the photos from Friday morning and the before and after shots. On Sunday morning, I personally drove through the neighborhood and found that someone had deliberately pushed snow back into the street, creating the hazards Miss Henderson photographed. So, I positioned one of my drivers where he could monitor the street. I paused for effect. At 3:07 p.m. on Sunday, this happened. I played Marcus's video. The room went completely silent as everyone watched Richard Kowalski deliberately sabotaging the street. When it ended, the room exploded in conversation. Richard stood up, his face red. That video is fake. This is defamation. It's time-stamped and verified by GPS data, I said calmly. I have the original file with all metadata intact. My lawyer has confirmed its authenticity, and I'm prepared to provide it to any law enforcement agency that wants to investigate. Why would Richard do that? Someone in the audience called out. Robert stood up. That's a good question. Patricia, would you like to explain why you held a secret meeting with only the board members who support you, then had one of them sabotage the snow removal so you'd have grounds to terminate the contract? This is absurd, Patricia said, but her voice was shaking. I have no idea why Richard did what he did. Maybe he had a good reason. What possible good reason could there be? Michelle Wu asked. She looked genuinely angry now. Patricia, what's really going on here? I decided to lay it all out. Miss Henderson's brother-in-law owns a snow removal company in Fort Collins. I believe she wanted to terminate our contract so she could award it to her family member, probably for a higher price. The neighborhood would pay more, her brother-in-law would make money, and maybe there'd be a kickback involved. But she needed cause to terminate our contract, so she had board members she controlled help manufacture that cause. The room erupted. People were shouting questions at Patricia, who looked like she wanted to disappear. Sandra Fleming was crying. Richard Kowalski was yelling that this was all a misunderstanding, but nobody was listening to him. David Torres banged the gavel repeatedly until the room quieted down. I move that we immediately suspend Patricia Henderson as board president pending a full investigation into these allegations. I second, Michelle Wu said instantly. All in favor, David called out. 4 hands went up. David, Michelle, Robert, and even Sandra Fleming, who looked terrified but determined. The motion passes. Patricia, you're suspended. Please step away from the board table. Patricia stood there for a moment, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room, heels clicking furiously on the tile floor. Richard Kowalski followed her. The meeting continued for another hour. David Torres, as vice president, took over running things. They voted unanimously to maintain the contract with Arctic Storm, formally apologized for the false accusations, and agreed to pay my legal fees for having to deal with this mess. They also voted to conduct a full audit of all HOA finances and decisions made during Patricia's 3 months as president. Robert found me afterward in the parking lot. That was something else. I've been on this board for 5 years, and I've never seen anything like that. Think she'll come back and fight the suspension? Honestly, I think she'll resign. She's too proud to deal with the humiliation of everyone knowing what she tried to do, and if we do find evidence of financial impropriety, she could face criminal charges. What about Kowalski? He's already submitted his resignation. Sandra too, though I think she was more of a follower than an active participant. She's not a bad person, just weak. I drove home that night feeling like I'd just survived a battle. My phone was blowing up with messages from neighbors thanking me. People I'd barely spoken to in years, suddenly wanting to get coffee and hear the full story. The following Monday, I got a call from Detective Sarah Martinez with the Boulder Police Department. The HOA board had formally reported the incident, and they were opening an investigation into Patricia Henderson and Richard Kowalski for fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. Mr. Erikson, we'd like to get a formal statement from you and copies of all your evidence, Detective Martinez said. We take HOA fraud seriously, especially when it involves potential kickbacks and conspiracy. I spent 3 hours at the police station that afternoon, walking through everything. Detective Martinez was thorough, taking notes on every detail, reviewing every piece of evidence I'd brought. She was particularly interested in the financial angle. You have any direct evidence that Miss Henderson was planning to receive money from her brother-in-law in exchange for awarding him the contract? She asked. No, that was speculation on my part. But I'd recommend looking at her financial records if you can get a warrant. She seemed pretty desperate to make this happen. We're already working on that. The HOA board has given us access to all their financial records, and we'll be interviewing the other board members. If there's something there, we'll find it. 2 weeks later, the story broke in the Boulder Daily Camera. The headline read, Evergreen Hills HOA President Charged with Fraud Conspiracy. The article detailed how Patricia Henderson and Richard Kowalski had conspired to manufacture evidence of poor performance by a contracted snow removal company, so they could terminate the contract and award it to a company owned by Henderson's brother-in-law, who had agreed to pay her 15% of the contract value annually as a consulting fee. The police had found emails between Patricia and her brother-in-law discussing the arrangement, along with bank records showing she'd received $5,000 from him the day after the secret board meeting. Richard Kowalski had cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge, providing testimony that Patricia had promised him she'd support his candidacy for HOA president if he helped her with the snow removal scheme. Both Patricia and her brother-in-law were charged with fraud and conspiracy. Richard got probation and community service for his cooperation. Patricia fought the charges at first, hiring an expensive lawyer from Denver, but eventually took a plea deal. 2 years probation, a $10,000 fine, restitution to the HOA for legal fees, and a ban from serving on any HOA board in Colorado for 10 years. The story got picked up by local news stations, and suddenly, my company was getting calls from neighborhoods all over the Front Range wanting to hire us. Apparently, the snow removal company that caught the crooked HOA president was good for business. We signed 12 new contracts in the month after the story broke, and I had to hire 8 more employees to handle the increased workload. Robert Chang took over as HOA president after Patricia's suspension became a full removal. His first act was to implement new transparency policies. All board meetings had to be publicly noticed at least 72 hours in advance. All financial decisions over $500 required a full board vote, and all contracts had to be put out for competitive bidding with clear evaluation criteria. The neighborhood settled back into something like normalcy. Mrs. Chen kept baking her amazing cookies and occasionally brought some over for me. The Johnsons, who'd been terrorized over their tree placement, got a formal apology from the board and reimbursement for their relocation costs. Several other homeowners who'd been unfairly fined during Patricia's tenure got their money back. I went back to my normal routine, running my company during the week, working on my restoration truck on weekends, and generally minding my own business. Though I did accept Robert's invitation to join the HOA Architectural Review Committee, figuring it was good to have someone on there who actually cared about being fair and reasonable. About 6 months after everything went down, I was in my garage on a Saturday afternoon, finally installing the rebuilt carburetor on my F-250 when my doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a rag and went to answer it. Standing on my porch was a woman I'd never seen before, probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and an apologetic smile. "Hi, are you Greg Erikson?" "That's me." "I'm Christine Palmer. I just bought the Henderson house down the street." She gestured vaguely in the direction of what used to be Patricia's place. I wanted to introduce myself and honestly thank you. Thank you for what? For standing up to the previous owner. I bought the house in a short sale after she had to move. My realtor told me the whole story about what happened with the HOA fraud. I was actually nervous about buying in an HOA after hearing that, but then I learned about all the reforms the board implemented. This seems like a really great neighborhood now. "It is," I said. "People here are good folks. Just had some bad leadership for a while." "Well, I work in corporate compliance, so I really appreciate what you did. Most people would have just paid the fine or let it slide to avoid the hassle. The fact that you documented everything and followed through, that takes guts." She held out a container. "I made brownies. Consider it a thank you from someone who appreciates people who do the right thing." The brownies were excellent. Christine turned out to be a great addition to the neighborhood, someone who actually cared about community without trying to control everything. She and her husband hosted a block party that summer, and it felt like the neighborhood had finally healed from the Patricia Henderson era. I kept running Arctic Storm, watching it grow year after year. Tom Martinez eventually became a partner in the business, and Marcus Santiago became our head of operations. We got a reputation not just for good snow removal, but for integrity and professionalism. Several other HOAs called us specifically because they'd heard about how we'd handled the Evergreen Hills situation, wanting to work with a company that would be honest with them even when it wasn't convenient. The old F-250 got finished that fall. I took it to a car show in Denver and won Best Restoration in the vintage truck category, which was satisfying in a completely different way than catching a corrupt HOA president, but satisfying nonetheless. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I dated occasionally, nothing serious, mostly focused on my business and my hobbies. Robert and I became close friends, grabbing breakfast every Sunday morning at a diner in Boulder to talk about everything from HOA business to Broncos games to his latest grandkid stories. One Sunday morning, about a year after the Patricia incident, Robert brought up something interesting. "You know, Greg, I've been thinking. What you did last year exposing Patricia, that took a specific set of skills. You had the business expertise to know she was violating your contract. You had the operational knowledge to document everything properly. You had the patience to build a case instead of just reacting emotionally. And you had the guts to stand up in front of everyone and present it." "I guess so. What's your point?" "My point is that most people don't have all those skills. And there are probably hundreds of HOAs in Colorado dealing with corruption or incompetence or abuse of power, but the homeowners don't know how to fight back effectively. You think I should become some kind of HOA vigilante?" I laughed, but Robert looked serious. "Not exactly, but you could consult. Help people understand their rights, review contracts, provide expert testimony when needed. You've got credibility now. People would listen to you." I thought about it. The idea had some appeal. I'd gotten dozens of emails over the past year from people asking for advice about their own HOA problems. Most of the time, I'd helped where I could, pointing them toward resources or explaining how to properly document violations. "I don't know, Robert. I've got a business to run." "Your business basically runs itself now. Tom and Marcus handle the day-to-day operations. You're doing what, 30 hours a week? You've got time. He sipped his coffee. Just think about it. You could help a lot of people. I did think about it. And over the next few months, I started taking on a few consulting cases. A neighborhood in Longmont where the HOA was refusing to make needed repairs to common areas, despite having plenty of money in their reserves. A condo association in Westminster, where the board president was awarding maintenance contracts to his own companies at inflated prices. A retirement community in Colorado Springs where the management company was charging fees that weren't authorized in the governing documents. Each case was different, but the pattern was usually the same. Someone in power abusing that power, counting on homeowners being too intimidated or uninformed to fight back effectively. And in each case, I helped those homeowners understand their rights, document the problems, and present their case in a way that got results. I didn't charge much, usually just enough to cover my time and expenses. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. About standing up to bullies who thought they could push people around just because they held a gavel or a board position. Word spread. I got written up in a Denver Post article about HOA reform. A local TV station did a profile on me. The Colorado HOA Forum, a statewide advocacy group, asked me to speak at their annual conference. But I never forgot where it all started. On a cold January morning, with Patricia Henderson standing on my porch, pointing her finger at me and threatening fines she had no legal right to issue. She thought she was threatening some random homeowner who would either cave to her pressure or be powerless to fight back. She didn't know she was threatening someone who owned the company she was trying to weaponize against me. Someone who had built a business on documentation and integrity. Someone who had learned in the Army that you don't back down from bullies. You stand your ground and make them face the consequences of their actions. Every time I help someone stand up to an abusive HOA, I think about that morning. About how different things might have been if I hadn't owned Arctic Storm, if I hadn't had the resources and knowledge to fight back. How many people Patricia had probably steamrolled in her 3 months of power, people who didn't have the tools to defend themselves. The last I heard, Patricia Henderson had moved to Arizona and was reportedly trying to get elected to her new HOA board there. I actually felt a little bad for her new neighbors, but I'd sent a detailed account of what happened in Colorado to the president of that HOA, just as a courtesy. I never heard back, but I like to imagine them being prepared for her tactics. Richard Kowalski moved out of Evergreen Hills about 6 months after his conviction. I saw him loading boxes into a moving truck one Saturday and actually went over to talk to him. He looked embarrassed and wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Mr. Erikson, I just want to say I'm sorry for what I did. It was stupid and wrong and I have no excuse." "Why'd you do it?" I asked. Not angry, just curious, he sighed. Patricia was very persuasive. She made it sound like we'd be heroes, getting rid of an incompetent contractor and saving the HOA money. And she promised to support me for president, which I wanted. I'd been on the board for 2 years and felt like I'd earned it. He shook his head. I let ambition override my judgment. It cost me my reputation, my marriage, and about $30,000 in legal fees. That's an expensive lesson. Yeah, but maybe it's one I needed to learn. I've been in therapy, working on why I was so easily manipulated. Turns out I've got some issues with authority figures and validation seeking. He finally looked at me directly. "For what it's worth, you did the right thing exposing us. If you hadn't, we probably would have kept going, found other ways to abuse our positions." We shook hands, and I watched him finish loading his truck. I didn't forgive him exactly, but I understood him better. He wasn't evil, just weak and ambitious, a bad combination when someone like Patricia came along with promises and schemes. The neighborhood threw a thank you barbecue for me that summer, which was awkward and touching at the same time. I'm not great with being the center of attention, but it was nice to see everyone together, laughing and eating and just being neighbors instead of adversaries divided by HOA drama. Mrs. Chen presented me with a plaque that read, "To Greg Erikson, who reminded us that integrity matters and bullies don't win when good people stand up." It hangs in my office now, right next to my Army service medals and my business license. Tom Martinez gave a toast at that barbecue that I still think about sometimes. He raised his beer and said, "Boss, you taught me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. You could have just paid those bogus fines to make the problem go away. Instead, you fought back, not just for yourself but for everyone in this neighborhood. That's leadership. That's the thing about standing up to bullies and corruption. It's not just about you. It's about setting an example, showing other people that they don't have to accept being pushed around." Every person who saw what happened with Patricia Henderson learned that HOA boards aren't untouchable, that homeowners have rights, and that documentation and persistence can beat power and connections. I continued running Arctic Storm, and it kept growing. We expanded into landscaping services during the summer months, which kept our crews employed year-round and diversified our revenue. We got contracts with several major commercial properties, including the Boulder Regional Airport and 2 hospital systems. But I never forgot that the company started with just me and a used truck, working 18-hour days to build something reliable and honest. Every new employee gets told the story of Patricia Henderson during their orientation, not as a war story, but as a reminder of why we document everything, why we take pride in our work, and why integrity isn't negotiable. Marcus Santiago eventually left to start his own business, a mobile mechanic service for commercial vehicles. I helped him get started, even invested some money to get him rolling. He sends me a Christmas card every year with a photo of his family and an update on his business. Last I heard, he had 6 mechanics working for him and was expanding into Wyoming. Tom Martinez is still my partner, still running operations with the same attention to detail that helped us nail Patricia's fraud. He's talking about retirement in a few years, maybe moving to Hawaii with his wife. I'll miss working with him, but he's earned it. As for me, I'm 52 now. Arctic Storm is stable and profitable. My consulting work helping people fight HOA abuse has become almost a second career, though I still don't charge much. I finished restoring the F-250 and bought a 1968 Mustang that needs work, so I've got a new garage project. I never did get married, never had kids. Sometimes I wonder about that, if I should have prioritized personal relationships more than building a business. But mostly, I'm content. I've got friends, work I'm proud of, and hobbies I enjoy. I've made a difference in my community and in the lives of people who needed help standing up to bullies. And every winter, when the first big snow hits, I still get up early and shovel my own driveway before dawn. Then I drive through Evergreen Hills, checking to make sure my crews have done their work properly, that every street is clear and safe and exactly the way it should be. Because that's what this was always about. Not about catching a corrupt HOA president, though that felt good. Not about winning or being right or getting revenge. It was about doing the job properly, keeping people safe, and refusing to let someone's lies and schemes override the truth. Patricia Henderson thought she could manufacture a crisis, blame my company for problems we didn't cause, and use that as an excuse to funnel money to her family. She thought nobody would challenge her, that her position and confidence and carefully constructed narrative would be enough. She was wrong. And now, Every time it snows in Boulder County, there's a fleet of trucks with Arctic Storm logos on the doors, driven by people who take pride in their work and know that integrity matters more than shortcuts or schemes. The company she tried to destroy is thriving. The neighborhood she tried to control has reformed and strengthened its governance. And the homeowner she tried to intimidate became someone who helps other people fight back against exactly the kind of abuse she represented. That's the real victory. Not just stopping one corrupt HOA president, but creating something better in the aftermath. Showing people that they don't have to accept being pushed around, that documentation and persistence and standing up for what's right can actually win against power and connections and carefully constructed lies. I still live in the same house on Pinecrest Avenue. Still love the view of the mountains from my back deck. Still appreciate my neighbors and the community we've built together. And every time I see someone new move into the neighborhood, I think about Christine Palmer and her brownies and her gratitude for someone who stood up to corruption. Because that's what communities are supposed to be. Places where people look out for each other, where integrity matters, and where bullies don't get to win just because they have a title or a gavel or a board position. The streets of Evergreen Hills are always clear in winter. My crews make sure of that. But more importantly, the governance is clear too. Transparent, accountable, and focused on actually serving the community instead of personal agendas and family enrichment schemes. That's worth more than any amount of money Patricia Henderson could have skimmed from snow removal contracts. That's worth all the hassle of fighting back, of documenting everything, of standing in front of a room full of neighbors, and proving that the accusations against my company were manufactured lies. And every time I help someone else fight back against their own HOA corruption, I think about that morning on my porch. Patricia Henderson pointing her finger at me, threatening fines she had no right to issue, confident in her power and her scheme. She didn't know who she was threatening. And by the time she figured it out, it was too late. That's the lesson I hope people take from this story. Know your rights. Document everything. Don't back down from bullies. And remember that positions of power are supposed to be about service, not personal enrichment or petty tyranny. The snow keeps falling in Colorado every winter. And every winter, Arctic Storm keeps clearing it away, one street at a time, with integrity and pride, and the knowledge that we do this work the right way every single time. Because that's what Patricia Henderson tried to take away from us. Our reputation, our contracts, our livelihood. She failed. And in failing, she taught a lot of people valuable lessons about standing up to corruption, the importance of documentation, and why HOA reform matters. I'm proud of that. Proud of my company, proud of my community, and proud that when someone tried to bully me, I had the resources and the courage to fight back effectively. That's my story. A HOA president demanded I plow their streets, threatened massive fines, and tried to destroy my company. She didn't know I owned the company she was trying to weaponize against me. And by the time she figured it out, I'd already documented her fraud and conspiracy, exposed her scheme to the whole neighborhood, and helped trigger a criminal investigation that ended with her conviction. Justice served, reputation intact, and a neighborhood stronger for having faced and overcome corruption in its leadership. That's all anyone can ask for, really. That's enough.